Hello, today we're going to talk about needle felting. So, needle felting is the binding or matting of wool fibers, which is done by repeatedly poking the wool with a felting needle like this. So, a felting needle is different from a regular one because it has these little indents called barbs, as you can see here, which interlock the wool fibers together, making it more condensed and solid. Before we dive in, I just want to give some context. So, felting is thought to have originated in the Neolithic period among the nomadic people of Central Asia. The practice then spread to Siberia, Europe, and other countries throughout the world. Before sheep were domesticated, people would shear wild animals to get felt, and the material was valued for its waterproofing and insulating abilities and was mostly used for clothing. So that's why we saw the hat from before and then the shoes here. In Mongolia, they would use large sheets of felt to cover yurts and to cover the ground with felt rugs, so it would have looked something like this. In order to acquire the felt, or to make the large sheets of felt, rather, they would use either camels or horses to drag the rolls of wet fleece across the ground. And the rough ground, in combination with the pressure of their hooves, would create the friction needed to bind the fibers together and make, the giant sheets of felt that you see there. The production of felt changed with the Industrial Revolution when, instead of manually being produced, it was being commercially produced in big machines. And mostly the purpose for that was for batting and insulation, things like that. So the way these machines worked was you put wool in, these large rolly parts you see on the left, and then it would go in, and then a bunch of needles would poke it all at the same time, and then the outcome would be flat, large sheets of felt. These machines can actually be thanked for the development of 3D felting, believe it or not. In the 1980s, in Martha's Vineyard, Eleanor and David Stanwood they pulled a needle from one of those industrial felting machines and experimented and developed the technique of 3D felting along with an artist at the same factory. Ayala Talpai was her name. She created these small little sculptures, and that's kind of the first discovery of needle felting in a sculptural way that we know today. In the 1990s, Brigitte Krogh Hansen popularized the art of needle felting in Scandinavia. It then kind of spread throughout the world as she popularized the art form. Now it's kind of used for little fixtures, clothes, accessories, and larger scale artworks, which we'll see examples for now. So, like I said, needle felting is very popular. I would say maybe the most popular for making little fixtures or being used to make little fixtures like these. These are little bears by Jen Doherty in 2023. They're very cute, very, playful little soft toys that you can make. Needle felting is also used sometimes to make clothes. These are by Diana Nagorna in 2012. So, little purse and then this very elaborate, very cool jacket. And needle felting is also used to make larger scale, more complex sculptural works. These two actually are by Paolo Puck. The first one on the left is called The Oracle. I couldn't find a name for the second one or a date for either, but they're very, very cool. Very cool artist that makes things with needle felting. So now I'll move on to talking about some of the supplies. The first thing you're going to need is wool. So you're going to want carded wool, which has fibers going in different directions. Next is your felting needle, which again has barbs on them that interlock the fibers together. 38 gauge is best for beginners. You'll need a mat, which will protect your needle from breaking. And finger protectors are optional, but they're good for, protecting your fingers from getting poked. So these are two things I have made. The first one was my first ever needle felted project, so it's pretty learnable. And the second one here is what I'm going to make for you today. Yeah, pretty easy to learn, I think. So the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna take your wool and you're gonna pull it apart in smaller strips or smaller pieces. And you're gonna do this even if you're planning on making something bigger. This is just to get the wool in kind of like a deformed shape. So you're kind of gonna make a new shape with the wool you rip apart to make it easier to bind together, if that makes sense. It should look something like this when you're done, more or less. Now you're gonna want to grab all of your wool and kind of mold it in the general shape that you want. So I'm gonna make a fish and this is gonna be his body. So I'm kind of making the general shape that I'm gonna want to felt that in, if that makes sense. And it's not supposed to be perfect, just kind of like a general shot, size, dimension, whatever you want it in. Now you're gonna poke your wool in and out over and over again, making sure your fingers are out of the way, especially if you're like me and not wearing protectors. And when you're doing this, you're gonna make sure your needle is going in and out very straight, not curving, because you could break it if you do that, which is fine. It's very common, but just to not break it, you're gonna want to do it straight in and out. And then I'm also turning it a bit to make sure it's getting felted evenly on all sides. As you can see, I'm just poking it over and over and over and over again. This will get very tedious, but also kind of relaxing. And I'm turning it around to make sure I have my fish shape in mind and in execution. So this could be done as is if I wanted it to, but it's just important to remember that the more you felt it, the more taut and less quote unquote frizzy it will look. But if you want it, looser, squishier, then I would stop here. Um, I guess the more you poke it, the less squishy it will be, if that makes sense. So this is what I have for the body of my fish. I like the shape of it. I'm leaving the end a little fuzzy because it'll make it easier for me to attach the tail when I make that. So now I'm going to move on to making the tail, and I'm going to do the same thing I did before, which is ripping the wool into little pieces. And again, just like I did before, I'm going to now mold my wool into like the general shape I want my tail to be in. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. So now I'll hold it in that general shape, and again, I'm just going to start felting and turn it around repeatedly until I'm satisfied with the shape of it. And something I tried to do here was make like an intentional indent in the middle of the fin like fish sometimes have. I don't know how well that turned out in the end, but it is something that I tried to do, which I'm telling you because you can really kind of manipulate shapes a lot with needle felting. It's very forgiving. So here I'm trying to make different kind of aspects of the tail, poking things out, pushing things in. Um, it's very malleable, so you can kind of play around with the shapes when you do this. So here's the tail. I intentionally left some parts of the end kind of fuzzy so I could manipulate it like that and make them a bit more flowy. So you can have different densities when you do this. They don't all have to be the same consistency, if that makes sense. I also want to note that sometimes if you felt things too tightly for your liking, you can kind of pull them out a bit. So it's pretty malleable, manipulative. I don't know. But now I'm gonna attach it to my fish. So like I said before, I left both ends kind of fuzzy, which will make them a bit easier to attach. So now I'm gonna lay both pieces next to each other and felt them together by puncturing one object into the other, making sure my needle is going through both. So it's going through the fin and through the body of the fish. And I'm gonna do this carefully, not to mess up the orientation of things. And at first, I'm just making sure it's going through all sides. So that's my priority right now. And then we can get into the fine tuning once I know it's at least a little bit attached. So here I'm just trying to go to all sides, so it's mildly attached here. So now I'm just gonna do the fine tuning, make sure it's actually fully secured and that the fish becomes one thing instead of two separate things. So, in order to like seamlessly attach it, I also might go into my base a little bit. I might start felting the body of my fish a bit more just to make sure it's all seamless going together and it like stays together as one piece. So here's my fish so far. Now I'm gonna add two more little fins and then one fin on the top. Just by repeating the same exact process I did before. I'm felting my little fins. I'm attaching them. Gonna do the same thing two more times. Alright, so I've attached all my fish limbs, so this is what he looks like now. And now we're gonna add facial features. So for these, I'm gonna rip off really tiny pieces off of the wool because I know that I'm gonna make facial features which aren't gonna take up a large amount of my little creature. So here I'm just, getting little tiny ones for the eyes, a little tiny one for the mouth. So I'm going to take my tiny piece of fuzz here, and I'm just going to ball it up with my hands, and it's small enough where I'm not going to really need to felt the shape of the eye. I just need to ball it in this tiny shape, and then I'm going to felt that onto my fish. It's small enough that it'll work out. So kind of like before, I'm just kind of carefully poking it into my fish, because I want it to, be where I want it to be. I don't want it to move around, so I'm being very careful. And I'm also not sticking my needle all the way through because I want it to show up on the surface. So this is kind of more of a surface level felting. I don't really need it to be embedded in the fish just enough so that it attaches, but I also want you to be able to like see the feature of it, if that makes sense. So I'm just kind of going around, making sure it's in place, and now just kind of doing some fine tuning with the shape of it, the deepness of it, which can be manipulated. I went ahead and did the same thing on the other side, and now I'm going to attach the mouth. Similar to the eyes, I'm taking a tiny piece of felt or wool, and instead of felting it, I'm going to just twist it into its shape because it's small and thin enough to do that, and I'm just going to felt that right onto the surface of my fish. I'm gonna lay my mouth over the area I want it, and then I'm gonna take my needle and just kind of like with the eyes, I'm prioritizing the location of the mouth. So I'm taking my needle in like various places and making sure it stays where I want it to. So then now when I go in with like the finer details and making sure the mouth is to the thinness I want, to the curvature I want, it's in that general place that I put it in. So right now I'm doing the middle and the edges just to kind of set the general shape, and now I'm gonna do some more of the fine tuning, which includes just kind of messing with it a bit, poking it a bit until I'm happy with the general shape. And I don't need to go super super deep with this, just enough so that my mouth stays on and it looks how I want it to. So this is my final product. Ta-da! It's very simple, but very legible, very easy to do, and very fun. You can make something functional, non-functional, simple, or more complicated. And you'll need wool, a felting needle, a mat, and finger protectors. It's also not a bad idea to have extra needles in case one breaks, and band-aids as well. And remember, felting is poking wool over and over again with a needle to make an object. Alright, that's all I got. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have fun felting at home and making little creatures like these and more. Bye bye!